Good morning. Yesterday we talked about the blessing for new blossoms on trees during the spring months, and we explained when is the correct time to say it. Now this Shabbat is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's a special Shabbat. It's Rosh Chodesh, it's Shabbat, and it's also Parashat HaChodesh, 3 Sifrei Torah. And as we said yesterday, the common custom is that we begin to say Birkat Ilanot, the blessing for the new blossoms, during the month of Nisan. And the question arises, can one say this blessing on Shabbat? Or for that matter, during Chag of Pesach? So there are three potential issues here. Number one, there is a halacha into the Shulchan Aruch based on the Gemara. The Gemara tells us that a hadas, what we use on Sukkot, the myrtle leaves, it's permissible to smell them on Shabbat, but an etrog, which also has a nice smell, it's forbidden to smell on Shabbat. And the Gemara explains the difference between these two and says, look, a hadas hasn't got a taste, it's only got a smell. And therefore, if we allow you to smell it, there is no concern that you'll come to pluck it off. Of course, one of the 39 forbidden activities on Shabbat is to pluck leaves off a tree. And if we allow a person to smell hadassim on Shabbat, there's no concern that he's going to come to pluck it off the tree. Whereas an etrog, which has a dual purpose, both to smell and to eat and to taste, of course you can eat it, an etrog, there is a concern that if the Chachamim allowed a person to smell the etrog on Shabbat, whilst he's enjoying the smell, he may inadvertently pluck it off the tree and consume it on Shabbat. Therefore, the Chachamim forbade to smell any fruit on Shabbat where you can eat it. Any trees which have a good smell, which are not edible, Chachamim allowed a person to smell it. Shouldn't touch it, because when you're touching it you may cut it off, but you can certainly smell it without touching it, whereas any fruit-bearing trees which have a good smell, you're not allowed to smell it in case you come to cut it off and you end up eating it. That's the halakha in the Shulchan Aruch. And therefore one of the very late poskim, the last 100 years, wanted to argue that one shouldn't do Birkat Ilanot on Shabbat, because whilst you're looking at the blossoms, you may come to pluck off the blossom from the tree, which Havadia and many others completely disagree with. This is very far-fetched, and aside from the fact that we have a principle that we don't make up our own gezerot, we don't make up our own decrees. What the Chachamim said and forbade for us is enough. We don't add on our own concerns. If you do this, you may end up doing that, if the Chachamim didn't prohibit it explicitly. Nowhere do we find that the Chachamim didn't allow us to do Birkat Ilanot on Shabbat. And therefore, there's no reason to assume that just by looking, not even smelling, just by looking at blossom trees on Shabbat, one may come to commit the prohibited activity on Shabbat of harvesting. So therefore, that's not a problem. Again, there is a very late concern, also in the last 100 years or so, that in Kabbalistic works, the blessing of Birkat Ilanot is a very lofty blessing, and it has the ability to extract sparks and souls which are trapped within trees. That's what the Kabbalists write. And therefore one of the late authorities wanted to argue that when one does Birkat Ilanot on Shabbat, what they are doing is extracting ochel from pesolet. They are extracting something good from something bad, and they consider this as a kind of separation. On Shabbat, one of the 30 melachot is not to separate. And they argue that doing Birkat Ilanot on Shabbat is a kind of separation. Now, of course, this is quite far-fetched. As Havadia writes, how do we know to come up with these spiritual concepts and classify them as forbidden activities on Shabbat? According to this argument, every mitzvah which a person does on Shabbat should be prohibited, because whenever you do a mitzvah in Kabbalistic literature, you are extracting good from bad. Something spiritual, you can't have the concept of melacha on it, and therefore that shouldn't be a problem. Third, final issue, is perhaps on Shabbat people will carry the sidurim in order to say going out to the park and you're in a place without an eruv, you may come to carry the sidur. That's an understandable concern. Of course, in a place where a person uses an eruv, then there wouldn't be a problem. But furthermore is that, again, we don't make up our own gezerot. The Hachamim didn't prohibit us to do it on Shabbat because you may come to carry the Siddur outside. It's a very short blessing of 10 words, of not many words. And there's no reason, as long as a person doesn't carry on Shabbat in a place without an eruv, there's no reason to assume so. In fact, Chacham Ovadia writes explicitly that he would do Birkat Ilanot when Rosh Chodesh fell on Shabbat. He would do Birkat Ilanot, the blessing for the trees, on Shabbat itself. Because you're meant to do it during the month of Nisan. Zirizim makdimin mitzvot. You have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. You should do the mitzvah as soon as possible. And therefore, he allowed to do Birkat Ilanot. In fact, he himself did the beracha for Birkat Ilanot on Shabbat day itself. So in conclusion, although some late authorities had a problem with doing Birkat Ilanot on Shabbat, one may do so, especially this year when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbat. One may say the blessing, of course, ensuring that one doesn't carry a siddur in a place with no eruv, one doesn't cut any of the leaves or blossoms, etc. It's certainly permissible to do so. Have a wonderful day. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov.